Good evening, Meeps. We are finally here tonight, Wednesday night, with the next episode of the Meeple Syrup Show. Good evening, Meeps. We are finally... All right, everybody. Welcome. Apologies for the delays, but we got our tech difficulties solved, and we are here with our first ever designer spotlight. Sen, what's going on tonight?
Well, tonight we have a designer who we've never talked to before. Well, actually, I have talked to Matt before, just very briefly at Dice Tower Con.
Way to spoil the experiment.
Well, I know. But I didn't, really taint the sample too much because he was busy showing off the game that he's got on Kickstarter right now to many people. And so we decided that, let's showcase new talent on Meeple Syrup Show because we're all about lifting up voices and seeing who's out there doing what cool things and why they're doing what they're doing. So Matt is our first ever new designer spotlight person. So let's talk to Matt. Matt, can you just introduce yourself to us? Because I don't know if Erica saw you at Dice Tower Con, but I know Jesse definitely didn't because he wasn't there.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt Shoemaker. I live out in Philadelphia, and I'm a game designer and a librarian and a beekeeper. I've been designing games for about 8 years, mostly for work as my duties as an educator. I started off designing them primarily for history needs, for introducing students and just the general public into archival sources and documents. That kind of led me to meet Brian Meyer, who did Freedom, the Underground Railroad, so I ended up writing the historical background for that game and just continued developing and working on more games.
Excellent. We have a lot of people in the feed saying hello. I'm just going to say hi to Helena Capel, to Daniel Zayas, to Brittany Bowe, and other Jamie Jones is in there. So lots of people already starting to watch, and that's a great thing because they get to see you and your product. So you're a librarian. What kind of school do you work at?
So I work at Temple University. I actually run the Digital Scholarship Center there.
Very nice.
So I'm an academic librarian. What all that pretty much means is that I do a lot of stuff with data. I work for qualitative fields and do quantitative things with them. So we do things like a lot of game theory, game design, play as education, as well as stuff like cram 10,000 books into a computer and see what comes out the other end.
Oh, you'll have to tell us about that sometime. That sounds interesting.
Oh, sure.
So just, I don't know if you know, Matt, but all three of the hosts, we're all educators as well. So Erica is an elementary school teacher. I'm a psychology professor. And Jesse is doing his postdoc at Stanford right now. So we're all very hype on meeting you because we love education, we love games, and we love when the two intersect. And I found that some of the coolest people that I know are librarians. I never would have thought that growing up. I always loved the librarian, but never because of games. But there are a lot of librarians out there who are very, very into games, or people who at least maybe don't work as librarians anymore, but have that information science background. Why do you think that is? Why do you guys love games so much?
Yeah, there's a lot of people at work, too, that like games. I mean, I think part of it's just our kind of creative and inquisitive nature, as well as, we all went to information school. I mean, you do need a master's degree to be a librarian. You need at least 2 master's degrees to be an academic librarian. So a lot of that, I think, just leads to new ways of exploring and using information to kind of go over different fields and try to find out ways to understand and also communicate that information. And especially in today's education age, with Common Core and just kind of, traditional lecture techniques, play is like a newer, way to kind of explore doing all that communication and exploring information. I mean, I especially always liked it for history. The way I always view it is that, in the sciences, you can set up an experiment and, see what happens when 2 atoms collide. Well, we can't go back to, say, 1850 and see what happened if the railroads got constructed a different way. So doing things through play is another way we can actually explore that and actually have our own experimental playground for some of these other disciplines.
Very, very cool.
I think it's great to think of games as an information delivery method.
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's interesting to think of the educational differences in, I guess, the different countries, because it's been a focus for a little while now. I guess more, I don't know, Sen can maybe talk to the higher education levels, but within sort of the primary, junior, intermediate, we actually have it broken out into like ideas of play-based learning, inquiry-based learning, and that kind of thing. But we don't have Common Core, so we have a slightly different approach to things.
Okay.
Yeah, here in Canada, it's a little bit different. So, I mean, we have at the college level, we have ESS, so essential skills that you're learning, VLOs, which are vocational learning outcomes, and things like that. So, college is a little bit different up here. So we've got things that you must learn for your job, and things that you have to learn, or you are learning because it's a learning outcome of what we're doing. And I think the colleges are getting more into the idea of learning through games. Now, we always learn through doing because our colleges are pretty much like, in Canada, college is more at the trade school plus plus plus. So it's not quite a community college. It's not quite a trade school. It's sort of a little bit between that and a university. So it's a little bit different here in Canada. And we do a lot of experiential learning, but gaming is one of them that I don't think has a very great reputation, unfortunately, because it's like, what are you playing a game for when you should be learning?
Yeah.
And people just don't understand that you can totally be learning while you're playing a game. You know, like all children do. You know, as a developmental psychologist, that's all we talk about is, you know, play is the job of children, and their job is to learn, and they're all doing it through play. So why can't we do that?
Oh, kids naturally gamify everything, right? It already says what our inclination would be if people told us not to stop. So yeah, but you know what? I actually think it's really nice too, and I think we'll get into a lot more with Matt when he starts talking about his theme. Is that obviously something like a game creates a relationship with information, so it kind of creates that novel, memorable moment. So you're more likely to remember the information you're delivering. So why don't we actually talk a little bit, Matt, about, because your game is very thematic and obviously has a ton of information built into it that you'll learn through its mechanics. So did you want to kind of tell us a bit more about your game?
Yeah, sure. So Bee Lives, We Will Only Know Summer, is the game that I've developed. That took me about a year. I've been thinking about making a bee-based game for probably about 3 or 4 years, but I was playing a bunch of mainly Uwe Rosenberg stuff and some Carcassonne and a few other games, and it really just kind of dawned on me that, you know what? No one's really made a bee-based worker placement game, so I'm going to go through and do that. And so when I started that process, I really consider myself a theme-first designer. And so what I mean by that is I like to take games and think about them from what I go back to how I meant about how history, you can kind of use that as an experimental simulation. So I like to take systems that exist in the real world and start to gamify them. So what I mean by that is not, gamification, it's kind of, for at least us educators down here, we talk about that all the time. It's kind of a bad thing. This is more taking games, turning their systems into mechanics, and then actually taking them from being a simulation into a game. So I like to strip out a lot of the super complicated things, the unnecessary stuff to understand that system, and simplify it into something that allows you to still learn and experience what it may be like to go through the real-world system you're trying to replicate without having to go through all the minutia and detail of it. So that's what I did with Bee Lives. I've been a beekeeper for about 8 years, and I took all of that experience of, having hives, getting them in the spring, watching them do well in the springtime, having them to fight off in war against other bees in the summer, finally preparing for fall, and then having to, sit there and shiver through winter and hopefully had enough food so they don't starve to death before they could start that whole process over again. And came up and took that into Bee Lives and turned it into a worker placement and resource management game for 1 to 4 players. So basically there's 8 actions you can take. There's a little bit of take that in the game, mainly through the competition that bees have with each other. A lot of people don't realize it, but they're actually very opportunistic. And if there's a neighbor nearby that they can sneak in and steal a bunch of honey from them, they will do that. They also have, this is something I left out of the game, but they've got a lot of competition with, say, hornets, bald-faced hornets, wasps, ants even, and a whole bunch of diseases and things that I've kind of dumbed down in the game a little bit to a generic disease tracker to just go with their well-being and focus on the bees and the resources and the inter-hive interactions between them.
Cool.
Very cool.
Sorry, I was enthralled and I was listening.
Yeah. So we do have some questions online already. So Dan Zayas is asking, Matt, what drew you to become a beekeeper in the first place?
So that's kind of a long story. So part of it started when I was a child, and SimAnt came out. I don't know if any of you played that. I'm probably dating myself a little bit because this was like, I don't know, mid-'80s, early 90s, something like that. And I just became obsessed with ants and social insects in general. So with that, I gave reports on ants at school. I dug a giant hole in my parents' backyard trying to find an ant hive or a colony, all sorts of things that just led to that. And that never really went away. And then about 10 years ago when I finished grad school, I moved out to Philadelphia for work. And I needed some ways to both meet people and also to fill some of my time. So I wanted to do two things. I wanted to make mead, which for those of you who don't know is honey wine, so it's alcoholic honey, and I wanted to keep bees. So I figured, well, those kind of go together. I need bees to get lots of honey because you need like gallons of honey to make mead. And I can meet people through the local bee guild. If you don't know, Philadelphia is actually where the modern beehive was invented about 150 years ago. So there's a very strong beekeeping culture and population out here.
That explains that you have a bee guild.
Yes.
Enough people to constitute a guild.
I now need to make a bee guild for Belfort.
Yes.
Yes, there needs to be a bee guild. Okay, writing that down. Make a bee guild. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
Yep. But yeah, so I started that, started learning, and then I eventually started blogging about it. That blog you can find it on the Wayback Machine still. I do maintain it, but it's got a Server 500 error right now. But if you're curious about my beekeeping exploits, you can look them up on cameltree.org and take a look at that stuff. And I just started kind of documenting what it is. And you can really kind of see in some of those older blog posts where some of the themes came out in the game, particularly how my bees kept dying on me over and over and over again. Yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, it's not that dire, but I'd say about 50% of the bees I've had don't make it through a winter. It's harsh life being a bee.
It is. I guess that's where the game came from.
Yeah.
I was going to say, is that standard? Or is that like regional? Or
part of it's regional.
Bees.
Yeah. Yeah, part of it's regional. I mean, the game is designed for what it's like to have bees in the Philadelphia area. If I designed it for like Florida or something else, it'd be completely different. But the winters are harsh, especially as they've been getting warmer. Warmer winters are actually bad for the bees because they're more active, which means they eat more and they're more likely to starve to death.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that has been a problem. But that's not just me. I'm not just a bad beekeeper. Like everybody
now
out
I'm playing
here.
that.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. But everybody out here has huge problems with hive dive-offs, and it's, a lot of people start beekeeping because they think it's awesome, and then they go through a year or two with their hives dying, and they just can't take it, and they quit. So,
because it must be really demoralizing. Yeah, really demoralizing. Dan Zayas is calling you a bee professional.
No,
yes.
No, he's telling us to be professional because
I think
those
it's
are the
a
bee
pun.
puns.
Sam, I can't believe that you can't keep up.
I can totally.
Mr. I have a pun game. All right,
Yes.
So I got to ask Matt though, because you have some very interesting pledge levels. Is the honey in one of your pledge levels your own?
There might be a little bit of my own in there, but I don't have very much because I didn't get any honey last year, so I've only got about a gallon left. But it will be honey from the Philadelphia Beekeeper Guild. There's a lot of people I've worked with out here. Our apiaries are very near each other. Mine are in a community garden. Literally across the street is a cemetery where someone's got more bees there. There's bees all over Philadelphia. You just need to, if you know where to look, you see them on, rooftops and things all the time. It's kind of weird.
That's actually really neat.
Yeah, I was going to say, weird or cool.
So I know there was that. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I know in Toronto there's a few rooftops that actually are, I don't know if it's being researched or not, or just someone owns them, but I remember there being a big story about one of the huge hives and where the bees were going. I don't know why they were in downtown, but they were.
Yeah, I mean, they do swarm and they go wherever they feel like when that happens. So they'll, end up in a hot dog cart or someone's wall. Who knows? Just somewhere.
Sounds like an expansion.
Yeah.
Hot dog cart, the expansion.
The mobile edition. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Ooh, ba-ding.
I had to continue the puns. Keep going.
No, I think it's great. So we got another question from the comment roll. I hope, Ming, you forgive me for shortening it down. I'm just going to jump right to the heart of the question. Given that people learn when they're playing games, and a common part of that learning, whether you intended it or not, can be people can learn tangentially from game systems. I mean, you put a lot of work into Be Lives to teach specific things, but games teach stuff. And so the sort of main question, sort of spinning off that Ming wants you to answer is, do you think bad representations of systems, history, or culture can cause negative learning in board games? And also, what are some board games that you've experienced that had great tangential learning or just taught you something really cool?
Yeah, so I do think that's definitely true. You can have bad learning in games, especially if I see this. It's actually going to be interesting with my answer, I think. A lot of the older war games, I've seen that. I play a wide variety of games, and some of the games in the pack, particularly colonial era games, where they're just kind of set up for the conqueror to just win automatically, pretty much. While that might be historically accurate as far as a gameplay experience, it doesn't teach you anything but defeat. Now, maybe you could turn that into some sort of existential exercise in, what it means to exist and be angry and just kind of emotionally deal with that. But that's not what the game is designed for or to go through. Similarly, I think games that have poor representation and where designers just didn't really do the background research in what they needed to, whether it would be cultural appropriation or just even historical research on the system, can oversimplify things and put a lot of the assumptions of the designer into the experience that players take out of it. I mean, just like any piece of art or literature, I feel games take on a big piece of what the designer intended with them, whether they meant to or not, and you take parts of them with it. And you're going to, a lot of times if they design the game well, you're going to get experience out of it that they intended you to. If not, and it's unpredictable, it's a game that probably wasn't play tested very well, that has a lot of uncertainty in it, and you just don't know what's going to come up. Again, this is for maybe more theme-heavy games that are like this, which is why I bring up the war games. I think they're very heavy. And some of the ones that I've seen are actually better that are some of the more recent, like coin games. For instance, I did my master's history thesis on women and resistance in the Algerian War, actually the whole Algerian occupation of France. And so the coin game, I forget what it's called now, but it just came out dealing with the Algerian War in the 1960s. And it actually teaches you about the struggle in a very good way in showing the size of opposition and, letting you understand where they were coming from and why things were strategically important based on there, and gives you a feel of why terrorism may have been a viable option as far as they felt. I mean, you've got moral and ethical questions in there, but at least putting you in their shoes, it kind of does that.
Right. Excuse me. One of the things I remember, probably the very first educational game I ever played was serious, not a game that we were just playing in a school. But a game that we played for an educational reason was, I think it was one of the Columbia Games block series. So a war game on the Quebec War, the war in Quebec. Mm-hmm. And that was, it was pretty true to what we learned in school historically. But you're right. I think there's a lot of stuff where it is that whole idea of Victor, writes history. And so we didn't get to learn much about, what happened to the people who lost that war, what happened to the other people in that war, what happened to the people who were, maybe not white, or the people who were not male in that war. And so that was kind of interesting as well, to just look back on that kind of stuff and see that we don't have a lot of that history that has been basically erased or not told because of whose history it is. And so, do you think that games now, whether it's bees or an indigenous population or whatever, that we can do a better job of telling history that isn't just the standard old history that we often get in school? What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think we definitely can do that. I mean, that's something I've strived to do in my game designs in the past, particularly for education. I've seen some games do that. There's one, it's a role-playing game called Dog Eat Dog. It came out on Kickstarter in about 2012. It does this very well. There's some indie games that do this very well. One of the things I love to do is I take Euros and rip them apart and put theme and pour theme over them. It's easy to do with Euros because they usually don't have much theme or it's slapped on. So I know one of the games I like to do that to, I did basically I turned Settlers of America Trails to Rails from Mayfair, which is a Catan variant, and layered it with a bunch of different themes from the 19th century that had to do with the railroad, and really gave players the options to deal with labor issues or deal with corporate monopolies or unfair business practices, and layered that in with both primary sources from those actually periods as well as player choice. That really lets you reshape how history went. And the goal I usually try to do with that is put you in the shoes of those historical actors so you at least understand why they're making those choices. And I think games that aim to do that can do it very well. Again, part of that comes from my idea of being a theme-first designer. I'm going for that experience. That's what I'm trying to get people to go through. I want them to have a good gameplay experience, but I also want you to kind of understand something that I'm trying to educate you on.
Okay, cool.
So hopefully we see more of that. Obviously, we're talking about all the kind of hopefully the positives, but obviously we've had one kind of example recently where if it goes to the negative, where the research isn't done, I kind of feel like it might be the appropriate time to mention a game like Manitoba. There's a reason why, and maybe it's a good thing that people jumped on it the way they did, because maybe they wouldn't have once upon a time. But obviously there's a lot of dangerous things that can come from perpetuating something that obviously isn't true when you're trying to pose it as maybe historical. So I feel like we need to talk, that was kind of the negative side of what could happen if maybe you don't position something properly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the big thing. It's I don't know. I don't want to call game designers irresponsible. I think it's just something that isn't really talked about much in the field as far as, like being true to your sources. People, it's kind of the same crisis you face in education. Like, it's just a game. You're just playing. What's the big deal? Well, you know what? It kind of is a big deal, or it certainly can be, if you're teaching about this stuff, if you really want to be true to this and not just make something that mechanically functions as entertaining, but actually has, viable and well-researched background and truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That one didn't sound like you had any research. Go ahead, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your position on historicity in games? Is your second master's in history?
Yeah, my second master's is in history, yes.
I figured as much. Okay. So what is your stance on historicity in games? Like, if there were no women doing that job at that time, is it okay to have representation of women doing that job in a game?
Yeah, I think it totally is. A game cannot be, and I'm quoting now, I forget her name, but this came up. Are you all familiar with what, well, I'm sure some of the viewers aren't. So Rome 2, I think it was, recently was attacked because, and this is a video game, not a board game, because there were something like a 5% chance you might get a female general in the game, which was, numbers-wise, far more than would have actually existed. And the community manager for them had a great response, which I fully agree with, where games are historically authentic, they are not historically accurate. And the fact that you're immediately taking something into a system and changing the actors because you, the players, are becoming those historical actors, it's impossible to be historically accurate. You can make something feel very authentic, but that doesn't mean you can't tweak it to make some of your points come across. I mean, that's what anybody does, even historians. When they're trying to make a point, they put an emphasis on different things, and there is no reason you can't alter those minor little details about things that are ultimately not important when it comes to historical accuracy.
That's a good point. I'm just reading up on it. It's for Rome Total War Rome 2.
Yep.
By the way, that's the game that we're talking about right now, video game. And there's a lot of outrage about female generals from people who are claiming that it's pandering to social justice warriors, etc., etc. So
damn ladies want your representation. How dare they?
Yeah.
I know, right?
And 5% chance. Come on, why are we not in arms about this?
Right?
Oh my God, people are ridiculous.
The other game that you were referring to, Matt, is it Colonial Twilight, the French-Algerian War? From
Yes,
GMT
that's the
Games?
one.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the other game, just for people who are looking for games that may do historicity well. The GMT series, coin series game, Colonial Twilight, the French-Algerian War, 54 to 62. That is the entire title. So there you go. All right. So we have a bunch of other questions. Dan Zayas wants to know, what did you learn in your time on Kickstarter?
Oh man, I learned that the anxiety never goes away.
It really doesn't.
No, it feels much better once you've hit goal, but even then you're like, oh, it's not doing good enough. It could be doing more. I've learned not to give in to backers, and what I mean by that is you need to thoroughly consider every request. You can't be looking at every backer as, like you need their money so bad that you're going to risk the integrity of the game or possibly the delivery date to please them. That doesn't mean you don't consider what they're doing, they're asking for, but you shouldn't just automatically think you need to do it.
Are you interested in giving examples of things that they ask in case someone else is looking at doing this for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, part of it just comes down to like group discounts in order to buy it, cheaper shipping. I mean, I want to give people as cheap a shipping as is, but frankly, it costs what it costs to get you something, and I can't, eat costs on that. Other things are just different. The part of this is personal. Like there's been requests for additional solo material, which I want to give and I will work on, but I can't necessarily promise that I will be able to have that done in time to get the game to print without significantly delaying it, because I don't want to push something out that hasn't been play tested. Other things are just upgrades that may be too expensive or I can't get a quote for. There was something today that was asked for that I would love to give, which would be a nice, have a real quality insert in the game. But China, I found out, is on holiday until October 7th, so I'm going to have a real tough time getting updated quotes from my manufacturer. And the other is that I'm concerned that it would increase the box size so much that it would no longer fit into a medium priority mailbox, which would cause all sorts of other problems. Mm-hmm. So it's just really thinking through kind of what is requested of you, taking those requests in kind, and giving them honest thought, but also giving an honest response.
And I have to say, you have a really interesting page. You have a few things on there I don't think I've ever seen from other people, like the honey. And I think you have a pledge tier that includes beekeeping. Is that right?
That's right. There's one. No one's backed it yet, unfortunately. But there is a tier where you can come down to Philadelphia, and I will spend the day with you and up to 3 of your friends going over everything you need to know about bees. We'll go into the hive. We'll look at the hive. I'll teach you how to start your own hives up. And then we'll go have a honey tasting, have a dinner, a mead tasting, and, of course, play some bee lives. So yeah.
I'm also kind of curious, and I love this idea, so I'm kind of curious where it came from. You've got a live stream countdown on your page to, I guess, a stream you're doing with Bebo, plus like a subscription button. So I don't think I've seen a lot of campaigns do that before. I'm really kind of curious where that idea came from.
Kickstarter. They built in now, it's called their Kickstarter Live functionality, and we did one last week, and we're doing another one tonight. It just works well to get and engage with your audience that's already there, whether the people that visited your page and hit that subscribe button, or anybody that you blast it out to on social media, or who are just, the $1 backers that are thinking about it and want to come in. I will say last time we did get a few pledges during the stream. It could have been coincidence. It could be they were watching and they liked what they heard. I don't know. But it was worth doing, and we're doing it again.
Oh, I think it's a great way to interact with people.
Yeah, it's a cool feature.
Sorry, more questions, then. I'm sure there's more from the audience.
No, I'm just amazed at people being mad at the Total War Rome thing because and I didn't realize this.
He fell down that whole
stay out of those rabbit holes.
Yeah,
stay out of the comments section.
Stay out of the comments. No, yeah, this is the last paragraph of that post that I was reading from. The most hilarious part is that people are vehemently reacting to a game that was released 5 years ago. Now, because they started patching now. So for 5 years, this wasn't a thing. And now, 5 years later, they say, oh, let's put female generals in a patch, I think. That's how they're doing this. And, yeah, wow. That is ridiculous.
Yeah.
People are a little ridiculous when they don't have to do something face-to-face and say whatever they want online.
Right, okay. So most of the comments so far are just saying how much people dislike the group discount asks and things like that. So yeah. Helena Capel is saying that they want everything from you and they would take your baby if you let them. Well, don't let them take your babies, Helena. I like your kids.
Yeah.
They're nice.
The only question we've missed was from long ago, and Dan Zayas, again, just wanted to know your favorite bee puns, but I've been trying to keep those things.
Jesse's keeping the puns going, or are you keeping them away from us so we don't start punning?
I'm not particularly good at puns, I'll be honest, but I'm trying.
Yeah, there have been so many bee puns, I've honestly just kind of forgotten about them. Like, there have been bee puns upon bee puns, like, left and right. It's been ridiculous. Do I have a favorite one? Meeple, probably, which I forget
Meeple.
who on my team came up with that. But
That's
we have
a good one.
Meeples in the game. Yeah.
Meeples, I get it, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, most of them are just, inserting the word bee into anything where BE normally would be. So
they're kind of, low-hanging fruit puns, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's okay. But there's a lot of buzz about this game. Is there a lot of buzz about the game?
So we're going to go there now.
Well, yeah, I mean...
All right, let's do it.
Give me an avenue, I'm going to take it. How did you generate buzz for this campaign? That's a
okay.
question.
Sorry, I wasn't sure where the line of questioning was going there. So part of it is I've worked with Bebo at Bebold Games, and she's helped doing a lot of things. Her videos have been great just to do that, especially since I can design games, I can make a web page, I can't make a video to save my life. So that's been very useful. I also went to a lot of conventions. I went to the first one I took this game to was Unpub last year. Then I was at, not Unpub, PAX Unplugged. Then I took it to Unpub 8. I took it to Dreamation in New Jersey. I took it to GaryCon in Wisconsin. Dice Tower Con, of course, Origins. And then we had a booth at Gen Con, which was an amazing experience. A lot of people thought I was crazy. But two things. One, the game has done very well on Kickstarter, and I'm planning to ask backers where they heard of the game, and I'm curious to see how many heard it at Gen Con. Mm-hmm. Two is that they opened up a pin bazaar at Gen Con this year for vendors, which was fairly inexpensive to get into, and it paid for the booth. So basically, I mean, it wasn't a free trip, obviously, but a lot of the marketing expenses that I had set up for Gen Con, and I would have gone to Gen Con anyway. I go every year. I've gone since like 1992. I used to live in Milwaukee when it was there, so I've grown up on that one. But the fact that those pins helped cover a bunch of the costs was awesome.
And they're B pins.
They're B pins, yep.
That's awesome. That's really cool. The B pins generated a lot of interest, or people just come by because they were collecting the pins, and you got the chance to then tell them about the game, teach them a little bit about it, and say, hey, we're coming to Kickstarter at the end of the year, etc., etc. So the pins themselves, the material cost of the pins was covered in selling the pins, and you made enough from the sales to then pay for the booth. Is that what you're telling us?
Exactly right. The pins cost $2.50 each, and we sold them for $10, and we sold enough of them to cover the cost of the pins in the booth.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
I really like your alternate ideas of advertising. You're going down. Yes, it's more work in the front end, but you're creating all of these different connections and experiences that are really, really valuable. And I like if anyone tunes in enough, they know I go on things about people don't know how to market or advertise. So I have to say, I am pleasantly surprised when I saw your stuff that I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And
thanks.
it's like, I mean, Daniel Zayas will always tell people to bring an audience with them to Kickstarter day one, right? Because it is that kind of thing, and that's why, you know, a lot of us don't self-publish. We'll go with an established publisher because they bring that audience with them. But in the case when you are self-publishing, like you're doing, Matt, then you have to do all that upfront work. You can't just go on Kickstarter anymore and expect somebody to even click on your thing when there's something from Tasty Minstrel and Simon and whatever up there, right? This week has been a great example of that, where there's been so many Kickstarters just being dropped on people that people are going, ouch, my wallet is crying from this. So, I mean, we've been lucky enough that our Kickstarter did really well, and continues to do really well. It's a short one, but it's going to do okay. It funded on day one, but some other ones just that you'd think would fund haven't hit their marks yet because it's been so spread out. So we did want to talk a little bit about Kickstarter noise. Have you had any experience with that? Was when you launched a good time, do you think?
I think so. The main reason I think that is because I launched on September 10th. And we picked up really well. We didn't fund right away. We funded on Sunday. So we launched on a Monday, funded after 6 days. And then for 2 days, we continued to make about $1,000 a day, which was great. And then on the following Tuesday, so that would have been the 12th? I'm sorry, not the 12th, the 18th. A bunch of big Kickstarters dropped, and so did our campaign funding amounts. It just really dried up. We were still pulling in about 200, 250 a day, but it wasn't huge. It's since picked back up again, which is great, but there was something about that 2-week period in there. I mean, I know we hit the mid-campaign slump, which everybody does.
Everybody does.
But it was just so weird. It was like, you know, we were picking up a steady amount every day, and then it just went to nothing, and it coincided. I mean, again, this is just correlation. It could be wrong, with a bunch of big campaigns dropping. So I think we lucked out our week. There were some campaigns that came out, but nothing earth-shattering, and I think that helped a lot. And then the following week and this week, like you said, although this week we've been doing very well, but it definitely slowed off after that. So I'm glad we didn't wait until the 17th or the 18th to launch. I'm glad we did it on September 10th, which I suspect a lot of people avoided mainly because of September 11th being on that Tuesday.
Right.
And then not wanting to launch on a Wednesday or a Thursday. So I think that worked out in our favor. But again, it's just speculation. I don't know for a fact that helped or did it.
Well, when you get the backer data, you'll find out. At least somewhat. You know, you'll be able to draw some conclusions. So just people are on the feed complaining about the swarm of campaigns and how that has stung their wallets this week. And there are a lot of puns.
There's a lot on Tuesday. There's a lot.
Yeah, and the bee puns are giving Zach Connolly hives.
Wow.
So
we're
making lots of puns.
But Daniel is glad to see that you pollened through the mid-campaign slump.
Yes.
Is there any worry, Dave Tomei asks, about people backing out with all these new campaigns this week?
I haven't seen that too much. I have seen some backers drop, but you see some drop every day. It really hurt before we funded. And then when we were at 17, I remember the day we hit 17,000, which was our first stretch goal. That whole day, it ping-ponged above and below 17,000. It drove me nuts.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I felt like a huge liar. I'm like, we hit our stretch goal. And then literally 2 seconds after I posted that update, we were at 16,950 or something. I was like, But
playing games with my heart, right?
Yeah, exactly. But other than that, it's been fine. People have been dropping. It's just been, again, the continued marketing, doing videos, doing Twitter, doing Facebook, doing Instagram, talking to people, doing podcasts, getting all that stuff out there. just really key. And of course, talking to my backers, and as I say in every email I put out, spread the buzz. Just to keep that all going.
You got it. So let's go back to design of this game. How did you, from your experiences as a beekeeper and your experiences as an educational game re-themer, is that where this all came from? This desire to make a game about bees, and how did you represent all the things that happen in bees' lives in games? What are you most proud of? That might be a better question. What part of bee lives, of a bee's life, are you most proud of in the game, and how did you mechanically represent it? Sorry, I'm just
I don't know where you're going with that. Sorry.
I think what I'm most proud of in the game is making it very obvious that a bee's life is hard. Your bees are starving to death. Your bees are getting killed off protecting their hive and defending it from raiders. They are shivering to death in winter. Disease is killing them off. I think having all of those mechanically, I'll get to how I did that in a second, but having all of that into the game is something I really liked. I get two main comments from playtesters, from all the playtesters, and one is, wow, it really sucks to be a bee, and the other is like, this reminds me of Agricola, because all the starving to death.
Yeah, we call it Misery Farm.
Misery Farm.
So yeah, there's a little bit of that in here. And the way I represented it mechanically was through the resource management puzzle. So there's a puzzle in the game. It's the main puzzle where you have only so much space, and you need to navigate what resources you can hold within there, as well as leave space open for getting new workers every turn. Because frankly, new workers are either going to leave through swarming, which is a mechanic in getting new points, or they're going to get killed off from starvation or from being attacked.
Right.
And then the other way I represented that was through the disease tracker. So every time you do an action external to the hive, you bring back a little bee STD, so to speak, and just make your hive that much dirtier, which you have to take care of, manage, and clean, or else you're going to start losing more bees.
Dirty bees. So, what are the diseases, really? What are the diseases that really do affect the bees?
Yeah, there's a lot. It's represented in the game by a varroa mite, which is probably the most known, at least to beekeepers, problem now, which is an invasive species from Asia. If bees were human-sized, the varroa mite would be as big as your fist. And these sit on the bee and they suck the fatty tissue from their liver out of them and cause them to have just diseases and spread viruses, just all sorts of bad things.
So it's purely parasitic?
Purely parasitic, yeah. There's also a small hive beetle which gets in there and will infect the honey, and they basically, just defecate all over it and make it terrible. There's nosema, which is like getting your lungs clogged with a whole bunch of little parasites that just jam it up. There's the wax moth that gets in there and eats all of the wax that's in the hive. And then, of course, there's man-made problems like pesticides that get in there and cause colony collapse disorder and, just outright killing bees and things like that. So there's a lot of problems that can go out there with them.
And that's all represented in the game?
It's represented just as generic disease.
He says it's the one, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that would be when I was talking earlier about simulation versus a game that's fun to play. Yeah. It was simulating. I would have kept all that stuff in there, and it would all have a different counter and track, and it'd be insane. But no, I had to gamify things a bit. I had to turn that down.
That'd be the Phil Eklund version of it. Are you
what David said?
No.
Be Live's legacy.
Yeah.
You throw the Beeples in the trash can.
Oh.
This made me so sad for all the bees.
Poor bees.
Yeah.
Are you going to include any of that kind of information in the box, or about hey, this is a great game. If you want to learn more, hey, here's how bees actually do die, or these are some of the names of the parasites that do suck on their juices and whatever.
I'm torn putting it in the rule book. I did want to do that originally, and I may still. I'll definitely have it online. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think, including that kind of thing.
That's a tangential learning that Ming is talking about. Does it come from you as the source, or does it come from people now being really legit interested in finding out what happens to bees? But maybe you have to put some little seeds in there. I will say that of recent games, And it's not that recent, but if you remember A Few Acres of Snow, so that was one of my favorite resource books because of how good the writing was in the supplemental guide that tells you about that. Now, of course, Erica, Jesse, and I are Canadian, and so that part of history and that part of the war is part of our history, and it's obviously part of Americans' history too. But because there's so very little about Canada in gaming, I was super happy to read that, and the historical accuracy of it and all that kind of stuff was great. From what that I know about the war, and so I'm just wondering, is that something that you were going to put in because of the bent that you have towards education? So that's all I was wondering. I think I would do it if I ever made a historical games. I tend to make games about imaginary things, so I don't necessarily have to put that in there. But if I did, I would want to. What do you think, Jesse? Would you put historical information or scientific information in a game that was about it but didn't cover it to give people more to read?
Well, it's tough because the rulebook of the game's primary job is to teach people the game, right? And so if you could interleave it into the rulebook in a way that wasn't distracting, but connected the mechanics to like extra information, I think that would be really cool. But of course, it's the same way that as you said, the game has to be fun, and you don't want to have 16 tracks and 18 kinds of diseases. The rulebook has to teach the game efficiently and be a good reference for the game's mechanics, and so I think it's a real tough choice about putting stuff in there. You could, if you have extra space at the end, you could easily toss it in, but I think putting it on the website's a good compromise too.
Yeah, I mean, so A Few Acres and Snow had a whole book, a whole separate 6-page book about it. It wasn't part of the rules. It was outside of the rules, and I think that was a much better way to do it. So if you like it, here it is. If you don't like it, you don't need to read it. I also think maybe having some call-out boxes here and there might be interesting. It depends how you're going to do it. But yeah, what about you, Erica? As an educator, what would you do?
Yeah, I like the idea of either putting it at the end as kind of like a complimentary sort of, whatever you want to say, extension. The call-out boxes might work. That's what I was thinking, like maybe through a text feature. My thing about interweaving it is, if I was reading this, because you're making me sad. That if I was reading the rules, I'd be like, oh my god, this game is gonna horrify me. But it's good to know, but I kind of want to play the game and then learn all the horrible things. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, that's part of why I think I'm coming with the compromise, bring it online. Yep. Well, some of it's just realistic manufacturing and shipping costs as well.
Yeah, right?
I thought I could just interleave little bits of the trivia in there, but honestly, as I start going through it, just in my head, you've got just as much stuff on what's going on with the bees as there are rules. And I want to avoid that kind of, don't want to over-inundate everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say you've got such an interesting theme, and obviously, we've asked you tons of bee questions already, that I got to think if people were interested too, once they're playing, it'll pique this curiosity that they can go look up more of this information that you're going to hopefully have on your website and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, 1 second. There was another question from somebody, and I know it's probably somebody important.
Isn't everyone important, Sen?
Well, this person might be just a little more important. I just have to find them. Hold on. Keep talking. I'll find it.
Okay. Well, I do have to get going after this question, I think, so I got another stream I got to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Sen.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, sorry. I double booked myself.
This? While Sen's looking, can we ask you really quickly, do you have any other projects on the horizon or something you're thinking you're working on?
Yeah, I've got a few things. I'm writing a RPG setting book on North Africa in the 17th century for a RPG system that exists. I am working on a card game that's going to be the next publication by Hidden from a Shoe, which is going to be based on the real-world sport of Earth Dog, which is basically dungeon delving for dogs in the real world. Humans build tunnels and mazes for dogs and bury them, and then they put little traps of roots and water and scent traps and gates and things, and the dogs have to navigate them as quickly as possible to get through it and earn their titles. It's a real world thing. Go look it up. And
wow.
then I am thinking about an expansion for Bee Lives as well. One that will actually integrate humans, because there's no humans in this game as it is.
Hot dog
Oh,
carts.
that's true. Yeah, the
Yes.
hot dog cart. I can't find the comments. Where is this comment? It's actually a very important comment. Oh. It's like hundreds of comments. It's hard
That's
to find.
because they're just punning out like this whole time.
Well,
It's
no.
true.
Anyways, I actually think it was from one of your relatives, which is why I wanted to ask it. It was somebody asking when did you first play this game, or where did you first play the game?
Bee Lives?
Yeah.
Well, I first played it with myself, because I designed it with a solo mode from the get-go.
Okay, neat.
But publicly was with the Philadelphia Game Makers Guild, which has had a lot of good games come out of it. Nicole at Toys. Yeah, she, and her husband Anthony are out of there doing Laser Riders, the Set a Watch campaign that's on there. Kickstarter right now is out of our group. So is Meeple Party. There's a lot of great people there that we've worked with.
Yeah, that's what they were telling me. It's Sally Wigan Shoemaker who asked the question.
Okay.
Okay. And she's asking, where did you first play that? Cool. Do we have any last questions for our guest, Jesse?
Well, if you got a half second for one more question.
Yes.
Yes. We always try to ask this of all of our guests, and so you will have the honors as well. If you could give one piece of advice to a new game designer, what piece of advice would you give them?
I would give them the advice to play all the games. Play lots of games, take them apart, look at what you're doing. If you don't want to play all the games, at least play the games within the genre that you want to play, and figure out how those mechanics work, and do that. That if I had to give only one piece of advice, that would be the piece of advice I would give.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed having you, and I think everybody should go at least check out Bee Lives. If it's for you, back it, and show your support for new designers, people who are doing their, really their first thing in the big world of game design. So, welcome.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.